just...
Well, I think the most important part of that is recognizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people don't even know that it can be seen as like a separate part of themselves, and they so identify with it that there's no separation between them and the critic.
Right.
So the first thing is recognizing that there is a part that is like an inner critic, and then identifying it and recognizing when it comes in. That's really a big part of the work, is because if we don't know it's there, we suddenly feel depressed or down or beat up on ourselves and don't really know why. But if I can notice, oh yeah, somehow there's this voice going on in my head that's putting me down, and oh, the inner critic's here, then I have more space and more opportunity to process it before it gets me. So that's a big part of it. So then once you recognize that it's there, what do you do with it? So there are different ways of working with it. The one is, and it's complicated, and they're not all separated from each other, all these ways of working, but I'll just name them as separate things. So one is recognizing the critic as a teacher or a guide. In other words, what does it want? What is it after? And what does it want you to do or obtain or succeed in or take direction in that might be useful and growthful for you? So there could be a positive aspect to it, in that its motivation is to further you in your self-development or in the world channel or whatever. And it gets nasty and mean when that doesn't happen and it turns against you, right? So it needs to be honored somehow for that. So that's one way. The second way, another way would be to fight it, to go to war with it, to wrestle, what we call wrestle with it, punch it out, really get into it and meet it, connect with it and meet it. And in doing that, often what happens is that you steal a part or harness a part of its quality that's useful to you, and so you begin in that sort of organic way to integrate the critic by beginning to make useful its nature or its quality that it's offering you. So wrestling with it, you do learn a lot about it, and you can also harness some of its energy. Another way of harnessing its energy is to become it and act it out and go into being it and experience it from the inside out and find something valuable or useful in it. Loving it, playing with it, fantasizing about it, making a story about it. All of those are other ways of working with it. Regress, like often the inner critic is an intergenerational pattern that sort of comes from your parents or your culture or perspective that wants you to be a certain way. So going into that aspect of it, where has it arisen, how is it being passed on intergenerationally, and how are you then able to perhaps change that pattern or expand it or bring in part of the critic that's never been allowed, or something like that can be useful too.
Mm-hmm. What's worked for you in your
Well, what really worked well for me, because I had a horrible critic, oh my God. I developed this inner dream figure of an African shaman with a spear and a shield, right? And as soon as I noticed the critic around, I would call on my shaman, and it was a visual channel experience more, that the shaman would go to battle with the critic, and that was one thing that really helped me. The other thing that worked for me is I would just use my super punch to send it out into space. And that was another technique I used for quite a long time. But that inner figure, the shaman figure, for me was a great ally. And so that's another way of working with it, is find an inner shaman or an inner ally of some kind. It doesn't have to be a shaman, of course, that can take it on.